Why would a billionaire's twin sons abandon their expensive tutors for secret midnight lessons with the company janitor? I need to see real improvement in 2 weeks. If nothing changes, we'll have to reconsider the competition. Those words crushed Brian and Nathan Smith, but that night, crying in a corporate hallway, they met someone who saw what 17 experts had missed. What he taught them changed everything. This is that story. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love to see how far our stories travel. The sound echoed first, soft, broken, desperate. Anthony Brown paused mid-push, his mop leaving wet streaks across the polished marble floor of Smith Enterprises' 5th level. It was nearly 11 p.m. The building should have been empty, silent except for the hum of ventilation systems and the occasional creak of settling steel. But someone was crying. He followed the sound past darkened offices and glass-walled conference rooms until he found them. 2 boys, no older than 9, sitting on the floor near the emergency stairwell. Their matching school blazers were wrinkled. Their faces were red and wet with tears. Between them lay scattered worksheets covered in equations and frustrated eraser marks. Anthony set down his cleaning cart gently and approached. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "Are you two all right?"
Both boys looked up, startled. Their eyes were identical, dark, puffy, filled with the kind of despair that seemed too heavy for children to carry. The one on the left wiped his nose with his sleeve. "We're fine," he mumbled, but his voice cracked. Anthony crouched down, his janitorial uniform crinkling. He was eye level with them now. "You don't look fine. You look like your world just ended." The boys exchanged glances. Something about this man, maybe his kind eyes, maybe the patience in his posture, made the one on the right speak. "Our mom just told us we can't compete in the state mathematics competition," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been dreaming about it for months. We practiced every day. We wanted it so badly. But she said we're not good enough. She hired all these expensive tutors, but we just don't get it. Not the way they teach. They get frustrated with us. They make us feel stupid when we ask questions. And now Mom says if we don't improve in 2 weeks, she's pulling us out completely. She said we'd embarrass the family, embarrass her company." Anthony felt something twist in his chest, a recognition, an ache. He knew this feeling, the weight of disappointing someone you loved, the crushing sense of not being enough. "What are you struggling with?" he asked quietly. Nathan reached for his backpack and pulled out a crumpled worksheet. "This problem. Nobody can explain it in a way that makes sense. Our tutor just kept saying we weren't trying hard enough. But we were. We really were."
Anthony took the paper. It was a complex word problem. Rates, distances, time, the kind of problem he used to solve in his sleep. Before everything changed. Before he'd traded equations for mop buckets and late-night shifts. He looked at these 2 boys, their desperate faces, their shattered dreams. He'd sworn off teaching, promised himself he'd never step back into that world. But looking at them now, he couldn't just walk away. "Okay," Anthony said, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside them. "Forget everything your tutors told you. I'm going to tell you a story instead." Both boys blinked. "A story?" "Trust me. What if I told you this problem isn't about numbers? It's about 2 pirates racing to a treasure island." Brian's eyebrows furrowed. "Pirates?" "Yeah. One pirate has a faster ship but starts from farther away. The other pirate has a slower ship but gets a head start. Who reaches the treasure first?" As Anthony began weaving the story, something magical happened. He didn't lecture, he didn't drill, he drew simple pictures on the back of the worksheet, stick figure pirates, wavy ocean lines, a tiny island with an X marking the spot. He asked them questions, guiding them gently when they stumbled, celebrating when they grasped a concept. "So, if this pirate travels at this speed," Nathan said, his finger tracing the drawing, "and this one has this much of a head start, then we need to find when they meet," Brian finished, excitement replacing despair. 20 minutes passed like seconds. By the end, both boys had solved the problem.
More importantly, they were smiling. "Can you teach us more?" Brian asked, his eyes bright now. Anthony hesitated. Teaching. The word tasted both bitter and sweet. But these kids... "One more problem," he said. "Then I need to finish my work." They tackled another problem together, this time about astronauts and rocket trajectories. The twins were sharp. Their minds just needed the right key to unlock them. They were so absorbed they didn't hear the elevator chime or the sharp click of heels against marble. "Brian! Nathan, what are you doing?" All three of them jumped. Eliana Smith stood 10 feet away, her power suit immaculate even at this hour, her expression a mixture of confusion and disapproval. Her dark hair was pulled back severely. Her eyes were cold as they moved from her sons to the janitor, sitting on the floor with them, worksheet covered in pirate doodles. "Mom!" Nathan scrambled to his feet. "He was helping us. He explained the problem in a way we actually understood." Eliana's gaze settled on Anthony as he stood, suddenly very aware of his cleaning uniform, the mop cart behind him, the vast distance between a CEO and the night shift janitor. "I appreciate your kindness," she said, her tone polite but firm. "But my sons have professionally qualified tutors. Come along, boys. It's late." She wasn't rude. Eliana prided herself on treating all employees with basic respect, but her message was clear. This was inappropriate. Whatever this janitor thought he was doing, it wasn't his place. "But Mom," Brian started. "Now." The twins gathered their things, looking back at Anthony with pleading eyes. He gave them a small nod, a silent message. "It's okay. Go." As the elevator doors closed on their disappointed faces, Anthony stood alone in the hallway, the worksheet with its pirate drawings still in his hand. He should have felt relief. He'd almost let himself teach again, almost opened that door he'd sealed shut, but all he felt was the familiar ache of watching someone walk away. Have you ever felt like you failed someone who needed you most? Like you let them down when they needed you to show up? Drop a comment below. You're not alone in that feeling.
As Anthony returned to his cart and resumed mopping, the building's silence wrapped around him like a familiar coat. Most people would see this job as a step down, a defeat. Once upon a time, he would have agreed, but that was before. The memories came uninvited, as they always did in the quiet hours. 10 years ago, Anthony Brown had been someone different entirely. He'd been the youngest person to win the National Mathematics Championship at 16. By 22, he'd earned his doctorate. By 25, he was the most sought-after private tutor in the state. Elite families paid him extraordinary fees. Their children needed perfect SAT scores, Ivy League acceptances, competition victories. Anthony delivered every single time. His calendar was booked months in advance, sessions from dawn until late evening, barely a breath between appointments. The money flowed in steadily. He bought a house, provided well, felt the deep satisfaction of building something solid. But he was never home. His wife Grace never complained. She was gentle, understanding, patient beyond measure. She raised their daughter Haley alone, navigating the challenges of raising a child with autism, the sensory sensitivities, the need for routine, the meltdowns that could last hours. Haley needed consistency, patience, and presence. Anthony loved them both deeply, but his work consumed him. He told himself he was providing for their future, that the sacrifice was temporary, that this was what success looked like. He missed bedtime stories, missed parent-teacher conferences, missed quiet Sunday mornings. He promised himself and Grace that things would slow down, next month, next year, when he'd saved enough.
Then Grace's health began to fail. It started with fatigue she dismissed as stress. Then came pain she couldn't ignore. The diagnosis hit like a freight train, a rare, aggressive condition. No clear treatment path, no promises, just time slipping away. Anthony withdrew from his tutoring practice immediately, finally home, finally present. But by then, watching helplessly as the woman he loved fought a battle she couldn't win felt like its own kind of torture. She passed away on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Anthony had been holding her hand. 8-year-old Haley had been sitting in the corner, rocking back and forth, her small hands over her ears, trying to process a loss her mind couldn't fully grasp. The grief was suffocating, but worse than grief was guilt, the crushing, inescapable guilt. He'd chosen prestige over presence, success over Sunday mornings. He'd had years with Grace, and he'd spent them in other people's homes, teaching other people's children, building a reputation while his own family needed him. After the funeral, colleagues urged him to return. Parents called with generous offers. His reputation remained sterling. But Anthony couldn't step back into that world. Every equation felt like an accusation. Every competition trophy on his shelf mocked him. Haley needed him now more than ever. Without her mother, her world had become even more unpredictable and frightening. She needed stability, routine, and a parent who actually showed up.
So Anthony made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He applied for night shift janitorial work at Smith Enterprises. The pay was modest, the work was simple, but the night shift meant he could be home every morning when Haley woke. He could make her breakfast, walk her to her special education program, attend her therapy appointments, be there for the evening routine she desperately needed. His former colleagues thought he'd lost his mind. Some pitied him, but for the first time in years, Anthony slept peacefully. He was finally the father he should have been all along. Anthony didn't expect to see the twins again, but the next evening, there they were, waiting near his cleaning cart on the 5th floor. "We came back," Brian said simply. "Our mom doesn't need to know," Nathan added quickly. We want to learn the way you teach. Please?" Anthony should have said no, should have sent them back to their expensive tutors, but looking at their hopeful faces, he couldn't. "Just talking," he said carefully. "If anyone asks, we're just talking. Understood?" They nodded eagerly. And so it began, secret lessons disguised as casual conversations. If supervisors passed by, Anthony was just chatting with the CEO's kids while he emptied trash bins. But those conversations covered complex mathematical concepts transformed into adventures.
A problem about optimal speed became a story about race car drivers competing on dangerous tracks. A question about water pressure became a tale of deep-sea divers searching for sunken treasure. Geometry transformed into architects designing impossible buildings that touched the clouds. The transformation was remarkable. Within 2 weeks, the twins' practice test scores began climbing. More importantly, their fear evaporated. Math stopped being an enemy and became a puzzle, an adventure, something to explore rather than endure. They stopped crying during tutor sessions. They started asking questions with excitement instead of dread. They studied not because they had to, but because they wanted to understand. Eliana Smith hadn't chosen to be the way she was. She'd been shaped by it. Her father had been brilliant, successful, and merciless. From the moment she could read, he'd pushed her relentlessly. Average wasn't acceptable. Good wasn't enough. She would be exceptional or she would be nothing. By 28, she was the youngest CEO in her industry. By 33, she ran Smith Enterprises with ruthless efficiency. She was respected, feared, and completely alone. Emotional connections felt like vulnerabilities she couldn't afford. When she had Brian and Nathan, she approached motherhood the same way she approached board meetings, with clear expectations and measurable outcomes. She hired the best tutors money could buy, enrolled them in elite programs, expected results. But the boys kept struggling, especially in mathematics. It baffled her. They were intelligent. They should be succeeding. Instead, tutor after tutor complained about their lack of focus, their emotional fragility, their tears. When her company agreed to sponsor the state mathematics competition, an event that would bring national media attention, she had imagined her sons on that stage, winning, proving the Smith name meant excellence. Instead, they were failing practice tests. The ultimatum she delivered in her office hadn't come from cruelty. It came from fear. Fear that they'd embarrass her publicly.
fear that she'd failed as a mother the same way she'd feared disappointing her own father. She didn't know how to be soft. She only knew how to push. It was all she'd ever been taught. 5 weeks after that first encounter, Brian arrived early for his evening conversation with Anthony. The janitor wasn't there yet, so Brian wandered, bored, looking at the storage closets lining the hallway. One door was ajar. Inside, between bottles of cleaning solution and boxes of trash bags, Brian spotted something unusual. An old leather notebook, its cover worn and cracked with age. Curious, he pulled it out. The first page had a name written in neat handwriting. Anthony Brown, Ph.D. Brian's eyes widened. He flipped through pages filled with complex mathematical proofs, lecture notes, teaching philosophies. Then came the newspaper clippings, carefully pressed between pages. Local prodigy wins National Mathematics Championship. Dr. Brown named state's top educator. Students under Brown's tutelage sweep Ivy League acceptances. There was a photograph, a younger Anthony in a suit, not a janitor's uniform, accepting a trophy. His smile was different then, confident, unbroken. "Nathan," Brian called urgently, "you need to see this." When Nathan arrived, they pored over the notebook together, piece by piece assembling the truth. Their janitor, the man their mother had dismissed as unqualified, had been a celebrated professor, a genius in the academic world he'd mysteriously left behind. "Why would he give all this up?" Nathan whispered. "I don't know," Brian said, "but Mom needs to see this. She needs to know she was wrong about him." The next morning, they brought the notebook to their mother's office. Eliana was reviewing quarterly reports when her sons walked in, holding something carefully like it was fragile. "Mom," Brian said, setting the notebook on her polished desk, "you told us that janitor wasn't qualified to teach us. You were wrong. You need to see this." Eliana looked at the notebook, then at her sons' serious faces. As she began reading, her expression shifted. From confusion to shock, to something that looked like shame. Page after page revealed a truth she hadn't bothered to discover. This man she judged by his uniform had accomplished more than most people dreamed. His credentials were impeccable, his mind was extraordinary, and she dismissed him based solely on his job title. She'd done exactly what she criticized others for, made assumptions about worth based on appearance. That evening, Eliana left work early for the first time in months. She found Anthony in the parking garage, loading his cleaning supplies into his old car. "Mr. Brown," she said, her voice quieter than usual, "may I speak with you?" Anthony turned, recognizing her immediately. They stood in the dim garage, the CEO and the janitor, the distance between them suddenly feeling much smaller. "My sons showed me your notebook. I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about you based on your position here. That was wrong of me." "You don't owe me anything," Anthony replied gently. "I do." She stepped closer, her walls cracking. "Why are you here? With your background, you could be teaching at any university, running your own firm. Why janitor work?" For a long moment, Anthony didn't answer. Then, standing in that parking garage as the last light faded from the sky, he told her everything. About Grace, about the brilliant career that consumed him, about choosing prestige over presence, success over Sunday mornings, about watching his wife fade while he was finally home, but too late. About 8-year-old Haley, who experienced the world so differently, who needed routine and patience and a father who actually showed up. "After Grace died," Anthony said, his voice thick, "I couldn't go back to that life. Every equation reminded me of what I'd lost, what I'd sacrificed. I needed a job that would let me be present for Haley. Night shift meant I could be home for breakfast, for her therapy, for everything she needed. I chose this job specifically because it meant I could finally be the father I should have been all along, even if it meant giving up everything else."
Eliana listened without interrupting, and something fundamental shifted inside her. She'd built her entire identity on achievement, on climbing higher, on never showing weakness. But this man had done the opposite. He'd climbed down willingly, sacrificed prestige and money and status, all for his daughter. It was the opposite of everything her father had taught her, everything she'd believed success required. And standing here, listening to his story, she realized she'd been wrong about so many things.
"Would you continue teaching them?" she asked, her voice vulnerable. "My sons, officially, with my blessing." Anthony hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready to call it teaching, but they've learned more from you in 5 weeks than from a year of expensive tutors. Not because you're more qualified, though you clearly are, but because you see them. You don't treat them like projects or problems to fix. You treat them like children who deserve patience. That's what they needed all along." Anthony thought of Brian and Nathan's faces when concepts clicked, their growing confidence, their joy in learning. He thought of Grace, who would have wanted him to share his gift, not bury it. "Informally," he said finally, "I can't commit to anything more, but I'll keep helping them, for as long as they want me to." Eliana nodded, understanding more than he realized. The state mathematics competition arrived on a bright Saturday morning in late spring. Smith Enterprises' grand conference hall had been transformed into an examination center. Rows upon rows of desks, each with a nameplate and pencil set, hundreds of nervous students filing in with parents clutching their shoulders, whispering last-minute encouragement. Brian and Nathan sat among them, dressed in their school blazers, hearts pounding against their ribs. Anthony stood in the back of the room in his janitor's uniform. He'd been assigned to work the event anyway, setting up chairs, ensuring everything ran smoothly, but he'd positioned himself where he could see the twins, where he could offer one last bit of silent encouragement. When the boys spotted him, he gave them a small nod. "You've got this." The exam began.
As Brian read the first problem, he heard Anthony's voice in his mind. Every problem is a story. Find the characters. Understand their journey. The answer will reveal itself. A question about compound interest transformed into a farmer planting crops, watching them grow. A geometry problem became an artist designing a sculpture. Each challenge was an adventure waiting to be explored, not an obstacle to fear. Nathan worked beside his brother, their methods identical, their confidence unshakable. Around them, students struggled, erased frantically, second-guessed themselves. But Brian and Nathan had found their rhythm. Time passed. Problems fell. When the final bell rang, both boys put down their pencils and immediately looked to the back of the room. Anthony was smiling. 3 weeks of waiting followed. 3 weeks of normal life, while the tests were scored and results compiled. Then came the ceremony. The conference hall was packed again, but this time with parents in expensive suits, company executives, local media. Smith Enterprises was hosting, and Eliana stood on a small stage at the front, microphone in hand. She'd been nervous all morning, though she'd never admit it. Not for the company's reputation, but for her sons. She'd watched them transform over these past months, watched fear become curiosity, frustration become joy. Whatever the results, she knew Anthony had already given them something irreplaceable. But she hoped. Oh, she hoped.
"In 3rd place," Eliana announced, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "With a score of 94 out of 100, Nathan Smith." The room erupted in applause. Nathan walked to the stage, his face breaking into the biggest smile Eliana had seen in years. She handed him his medal and for just a moment let herself hug him. "And in 1st place," she continued, her throat tight, "with a perfect score of 100, Brian Smith." The applause was thunderous. Brian bounded onto the stage, accepting his medal with shaking hands. He stood beside his brother, both of them scanning the crowd. Then they saw him. Anthony, standing at the side of the room in his cleaning uniform, tears streaming down his face, his smile so proud it could have lit the entire building. Without hesitation, without caring about the hundreds of eyes watching, both boys jumped off the stage and ran to him. They crashed into Anthony with the force of their joy, wrapping their arms around him, and he held them both, this janitor and these two boys, and the room went completely silent. Everyone watched, executives, parents, media, as these well-dressed children from one of the wealthiest families in the state embraced a man in a janitor's uniform like he was family. Eliana stood on the stage, watching this moment, and tears she hadn't cried in years threatened to break through her carefully maintained composure. Then she did something unprecedented.
She stepped back to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "I'd like to introduce you to someone. Anthony Brown, would you please join us?" The twins pulled Anthony forward, and reluctantly, so reluctantly, he walked to the stage. Eliana looked at him, this man who'd taught her sons more than mathematics, who'd shown her what really mattered, and she spoke not as a CEO, but as a mother. "Mr. Brown reminded me that wisdom doesn't come from titles or salaries. It comes from dedication, compassion, and the willingness to meet people where they are. He gave my sons something money couldn't buy. He made them believe in themselves. He made them love learning, and he did it asking for nothing in return." The applause that followed was deafening. If this story is touching your heart, let me know by hitting that like button. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to you. In the weeks following the competition, Eliana made changes. She started leaving work at reasonable hours, started having dinner with her sons instead of reviewing reports, started asking about their feelings, their fears, their dreams, not just their grades. She also approached Anthony with a proposition. "I want to open a learning center," she said one evening, finding him after a shift. "Free education for children who struggle in traditional settings, innovative methods, patient teachers. I want you to run it." Anthony stared at her. "I can't." "Name your salary." "It's not about money," he shook his head. "I'm not ready. I don't deserve to." "My sons would disagree," Eliana said gently. "So would the dozens of other children who could benefit from your gift. Think about it, please." But Anthony couldn't. The guilt was still too heavy, the wounds too raw. He declined. Life continued. The twins excelled in school. Anthony worked his night shifts and cared for Haley during the day. Everything was fine. Until one difficult evening. Haley was having one of her harder days. A change in her therapy schedule had thrown off her routine, and she'd been struggling all afternoon. Meltdowns, tears, the overwhelming sensory input that sometimes made the world unbearable. By evening, Anthony held her as she rocked, exhausted from crying, her small body trembling. "Daddy," she said suddenly, her voice so soft he almost missed it. "Are you sad?" "Sometimes, sweetheart," he admitted. Haley looked up at him with those wide, earnest eyes that saw more than most people realized. "Mommy would want you to be happy." Anthony's breath caught.
"She told me," Haley continued, before she went away. She said you were special, that you made people understand things. She said it was your gift." Her small hand touched his face. "Mommy said gifts are meant to be shared, not hidden." Anthony sat very still, as his daughter's words, Grace's words, washed over him. He'd been punishing himself for years, carrying guilt like a penance, hiding his light because he believed he didn't deserve to let it shine. But Grace had never wanted that. She'd loved his passion for teaching, had been proud of his gift. She'd only wanted him to balance it with family. And that's exactly what Eliana was offering, a chance to teach again, but with balance. To be present for Haley's mornings, her therapy, her life.
while also sharing the gift Grace had always believed in. The next day, Anthony found Eliana in her office. "I'd like to accept your offer," he said simply. Eliana smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "I'll have the contracts drawn up. On one condition," Anthony added. "Haley gets to enroll too. If this center is for children who learn differently, then she deserves to be there." "Already planned on it," Eliana said. The Learning Center opened 3 months later in a renovated building downtown, bright, welcoming, designed with sensory-sensitive children in mind. Soft lighting, quiet spaces, interactive learning stations. Anthony assembled a team of educators who shared his philosophy. Every child can learn, given the right approach. No child was a failure. No question was stupid. Learning was an adventure, not an ordeal. Haley enrolled on the first day, nervous but excited. Brian and Nathan became regular visitors after school, not as students needing help anymore, but as friends who wanted to spend time there. The 3 children became inseparable. Haley's quiet thoughtfulness balanced the twins' energetic enthusiasm. They learned from each other, played together, became what family actually meant. Anthony found his rhythm again. Morning breakfast with Haley, walking her to the center, working there during school hours, home by early evening for dinner and her bedtime routine. Teaching again, but with balance, with presence, with joy that didn't come at anyone else's expense. Eliana transformed too. She attended Learning Center board meetings, listened to parent stories, learned that success wasn't measured solely in profit margins. She became more present with Brian and Nathan, not just checking their grades, but actually listening when they talked about their days, their struggles, their triumphs.
She and Anthony developed a partnership that started as professional collaboration but slowly became something deeper. Conversations about curriculum turned into discussions about parenting philosophy. Business meetings turned into coffee on Sunday mornings while the children played. They understood each other's wounds. He'd lost himself in work and paid a devastating price. She'd been raised to believe emotions were weaknesses. Both were learning to live differently, to value presence over prestige, love over achievement. Their romance bloomed quietly, without drama. Just 2 wounded people finding healing in each other's company. 2 years later, on a warm June afternoon, Anthony and Eliana married at the Learning Center, surrounded by family, friends, and students. Haley was the flower girl, walking carefully down the aisle with Brian on one side and Nathan on the other, her new brothers by choice. She was smiling, her eyes bright, her steps confident. The sensory-friendly environment they'd created had given her space to thrive. As Anthony watched Eliana walk toward him, he thought about the journey that brought them here. From the depths of grief and crushing guilt to this moment of joy and purpose. He'd lost Grace, and that wound would never fully heal. But she'd given him Haley, and Haley had given him purpose. That purpose had led him to these people, this new family, this second chance.
The Learning Center continued to grow, touching hundreds of lives. Brian and Nathan went on to win multiple mathematics competitions, but more importantly, they grew into confident, compassionate young men who understood that everyone has a story, that wisdom wears many uniforms, that kindness matters more than achievement. Haley flourished in an environment built for children like her. Her challenges didn't disappear, but they were met with patience and understanding instead of frustration. She made friends, she learned, she smiled more often than she cried. And Anthony, the once celebrated professor turned janitor, turned educator again, finally forgave himself. Every evening, as he locked up the Learning Center and headed home to his family, he felt the deep contentment of a life lived right. Not perfectly, but authentically. Not without pain, but not without purpose either. He learned the most important equation of all, that success means nothing without love, that prestige crumbles without presence, and that the greatest gift we can give is simply showing up. Grace would have been proud, and finally, so was he. Because he discovered something those expensive tutors never understood. The secret wasn't a technique or a formula, it was an approach.
It was seeing students as people, not projects, meeting them where they were, transforming fear into curiosity, making learning an adventure instead of an obligation.
It was about showing up, being present, believing in someone when they couldn't believe in themselves. That's what had saved those twins. That's what had transformed a CEO into a mother. That's what had given a broken man permission to heal. Sometimes the person who saves us is the one we never expected. Sometimes wisdom comes wearing a janitor's uniform. Sometimes second chances arrive in empty hallways late at night, disguised as two crying boys and a math problem about pirates. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to accept it, grace arrives not as a destination, but as a daily choice, to show up, to be present, to share our gifts even when we think we don't deserve to. Anthony had made that choice, and it had changed everything. This story reminds us that it's never too late to start over, that wisdom wears many uniforms, and that sometimes the person who saves us is the one we never expected. If this moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul Lift Stories for more stories that restore your faith in humanity. What's one second chance you're grateful for? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. Let's build a community where second chances are celebrated and every person's worth is recognized, regardless of their job title, their past, or the uniform they wear. Until next time, remember, the greatest gift you can give is simply showing up.